The B.rad podcast is brought to you by MoFo, male optimization formula with organs to boost testosterone. B.rad's macadamia masterpiece, mind-blowing nut butter blend. Chili Pad, temperature-controlled mattress systems. Inside Tracker, blood, DNA, and fitness tracking data all in one. And New Optimal, 3 nootropic supplements designed to improve focus, memory, and drive. And check out the bradkearns.com shop page, my personal selection of favorite products with great discounts for health, fitness, and peak performance.
I cannot look at life in a way that things are bad, but I always go, okay, then what are you going to do about that? I was a mess. And so, kind of crawling back from that over time provided me what I have come to see has been my purpose in life. We didn't get this far without having some good habits. So pick a habit that you did before and do it.
Hi, listeners. Get ready for a wonderful and deeply inspiring show with Dr. Joyce Mikal-Flynn. Yes, your fearless host wanders onto a college campus for something other than high jumping for the first time in a long time, and we go into the deep hallows of academia to talk to a professor with expertise in PTG. That stands for post-traumatic growth. Yes, we've heard of PTSD, so we are going to learn to see trauma in a new light and gain incredible inspiration from her story that's detailed in her book. Dr. Joyce has an amazingly positive attitude that you're going to hear come out throughout our conversation. But it's not that poofy, platitude-laden positive attitude where everything is sunny. I would say more like a resilient attitude where she has the ability to look at things differently and analyze the best way to approach things. She talks about how important our choice of words and language is, especially when we're dealing with something that is very serious and sensitive, like trauma, and supporting our own healing and supporting victims of trauma. You're going to learn about 3 different types or categories of trauma victims. Having suffered personally, having vicarious trauma, that's going through something, someone you love going through something and you being deeply affected, and then community trauma too, and how to move on and build resilience, grit, and growth after any of these things, which pretty much encompasses all of us. We've all been deeply touched one way or another, whether it's directly or indirectly. We're going to have some fun on this wide-ranging conversation. She's going to talk about the classes that she teaches today at Cal State University, Sacramento, and some comments about today's student, the lawnmower parents who are now pervasive. It used to be helicopter parents. She corrected me and says, no, today it's the lawnmower parent mowing the path and kind of trying to shelter their kids from failure and setbacks. She gives a fantastic quote that she shares with all her students. You're going to love that about putting yourself out there and learning from even your mistakes. So we proceed through some interesting topics, but it's not for quite a while into the show when the hammer drops and she describes in detail this medical event that occurred back in 1990 where she sunk to the bottom of a swimming pool after winning a relay race and was clinically dead for 22 minutes. 22 minutes of CPR. Thank goodness the experts were there and didn't want to give up. And then the long ordeal that proceeded where she had to reclaim her life. And again, as I mentioned, it wasn't all the rosy path of continued growth and improvement and wonderful insights. She struggled a lot, and you're going to read in more detail about that in the book. But Anatomy of a Survivor examines in inspiring detail how survivors used their inner strengths to build resilience, navigate through, and ultimately grow from traumas and major life challenges. Joyce talks about her 1990 incident, and when she came back to life and survived, she came to find that her new life wasn't her life at all. She faced depression, personal and professional setbacks, and ultimately recognized that that was not an endpoint, but a beginning. Over time, she understood that taking control begins with the essential choice to move forward. And boy, pay close attention during the interview when she talks about how everything shifted in a moment when she went from extreme despair to the point of considering taking her own life to this very a sudden shift in mindset where she realized that she was part of something bigger than herself and that she owed something to all the people that had saved her and supported her. It really is a powerful interview. You're really going to love Dr. Joyce's style. And here we go on the beautiful campus of Cal State University, Sacramento, Dr. Joyce Mikal-Flynn. Dr. Joyce Mikal-Flynn. Here we are.
Yay.
In an actual university setting. I'm in a professor's office for the first time, I think, since I was begging for grades at UC Santa Barbara decades ago. But it's so nice to sit down with you. A former student, Ben Ashton, is the one that said, hey, you got to interview this lady. She's got an amazing story. And we're going to talk about many things, including your amazing upcoming book, which is The Anatomy of a Survivor. Tell us that subtitle again.
So Anatomy, it came out actually in April of this year. It's called Anatomy of a Survivor, Building Resilience, Grit, and Growth After Trauma. So that's really been my personal and professional work probably for the last almost 3 decades, 2.5 for sure. So in terms of studying, researching, writing, speaking, all of that.
So tell us about the classes that you teach and how you weave that into the academic experience here at beautiful Cal State University, Sacramento.
Well, the 3 main classes that I teach here, I am a nurse practitioner, so I'm in the School of Nursing. And so I teach a class in leadership. And of course, there's all sorts of ways about how do you overcome adversity and challenges that are really important for leadership and management. Also, I do teach a class in neuroscience. I don't do any original research. I actually use other people's research, but I put it together and it's called The Brain and Gender. So we talk about neuroscience and are there any differences between the male and female brain? It's very interesting. And then the third class that I teach, and I'm very proud of this because this generated from my research, and it's called Traumatology, an Introduction to Post-Traumatic Growth. So I teach that course and it really focuses on, again, challenges, adversities, and trauma, and looking at how not only an individual, but secondary or vicarious trauma survivors, as well as communities, move purposefully, productively into the aftermath of trauma, into a growth experience.
This is a new term, post-traumatic growth.
Well, actually, it is not a new term. It was really put out by 2 researchers and 2 professors, Lawrence Calhoun and Richard Tedeschi, and they coined the term post-traumatic growth several years ago. However, it is still very interesting to me when I do give talks, and I even in front of clinicians, and I'll say, who knows about PTG? Well, of course, everybody thinks about PTSD, and they'll say, PTSD, you know about post-traumatic growth? No, I don't know that. And yet that term and that concept, and they devised 5 dimensions of post-traumatic growth. And I incorporate that into everything, but also especially that trauma class.
We're going to have to get to those, but I'm also interested to hear you give those 3 categories. So you have the victim of trauma, you have the secondary, or you call it the vicarious, and then the community. You gave some quick examples, like the Boston Marathon.
Right.
The whole community had to come together a year later to once again hold the event, and then maybe tell us a little bit about those other categories.
Yeah. So my initial.
Why'd she mention Boston Marathon, people? Because she's run that thing. We got a runner here, people.
So one of the things that is very, when I did my initial research, I looked at an individual's response to trauma and the aftermath. And so I'd done quite a bit of work. And actually, my dissertation was about that. And my first book, Turning Tragedy into Triumph, was about an individual. Approximately 6 years ago, I was awarded a sabbatical, and I wanted to look at what I was calling vicarious trauma survivors. So people around the trauma, had they gone through the same experience as a person who experienced the trauma? And in fact, could they actually experience a growth event as a result of that, just as somebody? So I also found out not only about vicarious trauma, but what's also called secondary traumatization syndrome. And they're two slightly different. Some people if they have seen a traumatic experience, can feel that. And then some people, like now, our poor clinicians who are dealing with all the COVID situation, are experiencing trauma as a result of their work. And then you have the community's response to trauma. And I do quite a bit of traveling around and speaking. And I happened to be during my sabbatical in Oklahoma City. And I went, wow, remember what happened here? And then I was in New York for the 13th anniversary of 9/11, and actually started talking. We became a member of a committee called Project Rebirth that dealt with a lot of the veterans, especially, but even first responders who have dealt with the aftermath of 9/11. And then I happened to have been introduced to Dave McGilvery, who's the director of the Boston Marathon, and I was able to interview him. And so you get to see that the trauma experience, or even challenges or adversities, you see themes, you see systems in that. And whether you're an individual, experience it yourself, or around people who are experiencing it, or working in the type of industry that you're exposed to that all the time, and or communities, you really get to see patterns in the way that they respond in a very productive, positive manner. And so that was the other thing that took me over. And that's why I wanted to get a course with that. And then my second book, Anatomy of a Survivor, really goes very much more in depth with all those areas.
So you see some productive responses, but I assume you also see some adverse responses to trauma. And luckily you're picking out some good things, and then you can go down that road. But what's a compare and contrast there?
Well, that's such a great question, and I really want people to know. And when I speak and work with people, I always want them to know I never don't pay attention to what happened to you. I honor, as I say, I honor the adversity and trauma. I understand very deeply from a personal level, and then even as a clinician and working with people, how these events can influence you. They're tough stuff. With that being said, I say part of your response to the trauma is that you're going to have to grieve. You're going to have to be depressed. And when I see people going through that, I always say, you need to go through this. This is part of the process, but I cannot leave you there. We need to now move forward. And what I have dealt with and what I work with, for on the most part, is to look at the productive aspect of trauma. I don't want to say the positive, because there's not a lot of positive stuff about trauma stuff, but the productive, the purposeful movement forward after trauma. So I don't spend a lot of time on looking at what's wrong. I spend most of my time at looking at what has gone right and how that can be implemented into clinical practice or even a personal lifestyle. So somebody just asked me about this the other day. And we look at, for example, when you're doing research, you can look at things like depression scales and anxiety scales. And I said, those are real and I get it, but I don't want people to go into that mindset. So when I do research, I look at resiliency scales. I look at the post-traumatic growth survey. I look at that because I want to shift people in a mechanism that is saying, yes, there are responses to trauma that can be moved in this direction as well. Because lastly, I always say when people go, well, we need to work with people. They need to get over stuff. I said, there's no getting over this stuff. You don't get over it. You learn how to use it.
Mm.
You learn how to incorporate it meaningfully into your life so that not overnight, but over time, you have found a way up and out and a purpose that goes with that. That's what people do.
So some of the terminology we commonly use, we might want to second guess when we're telling someone to forget about it, get over it, even things well-meaning like get on with your life. It
Totally.
could be misinterpreted or misappropriated.
And, I love that. So we're talking about athletes, right? You're an athlete. I'm an athlete. And the notion of words and themes became so prominent to me several years ago when the Olympics were in London. And I happened to be giving a talk about athletes who had gone through season-ending and career-ending injuries, as well as, retiring you talked about retiring at age 30, like who retires at age 30 and what they go through. The grief, the depression, the change in lifestyle, the change in your identity, all that. So I was giving a talk. I was at Cambridge and I was giving a talk at that. And so I was attending some other lectures, and there was this one I attended, and it was about disabled athletes. But you know what? They don't use that term anymore. What do they use? Adaptive athletes. And the change of that one word changes your focus, changes your mindset. These athletes are not disabled. They need adaption. And I love that. And I was just listening to a podcast with the Surgeon General the other day, and he was talking about we need to work on mental health issues. And I said, what if we called it mental health opportunities? So words, language around this is really important for me to maybe start to shift how we organize not only our thinking, but our vernacular around this.
Right. I'm sure being in the neuroscience world and the medical scene, the word choices are reprogramming the brain. And so what you call it and what you repeat and how you verbalize it and how you think about things could make all the difference.
I tell my students a lot, I go, don't come to me and say, I have a problem. I made a mistake or whatever. I go, you need to come to me and say, I have created an opportunity, because all mistakes and problems are chances to get it right. Chances to get it right the next time. So again, I am not foolish. I don't look at, but I cannot look at life in a way that things are bad, but I always go, okay, then what are you going to do about that? Even with my kids growing up, they would come to me with problems and I would say, okay, especially as they got older, you need to come to me with 3 ideas of how you want to fix that. And then we'll talk about it. And it's just, you get them into the process of, we talked a little bit earlier about the notion of taking control, making choice, key fundamental ideas, fundamental behaviors in the aftermath of adversity and challenges.
Taking control of what you can control. And I guess knowing you can't control what place you're going to finish in the race, but you can take control of your mindset and your effort at all times. So I guess you also have to know the wisdom to know the difference, right? As you talk about with the recovery programs, we want to let go of some things, like we can't control what happens with COVID, but we can control how we feel about it and our mindset and our behaviors.
And, I love this too, because when I work with people, my focus is always on, I want you to start out with what you can do. And then we'll go to what you want to do. Because people will say, well, I can't. And so one of the things that I found during my initial research is I created the term metahabilitation. precisely because I didn't like the word habilitation, or I didn't like the word rehab. I just thought that was so small. So if you look it up, it basically talks about going back to baseline. And I go, people go
That's what
way,
rehabilitation means?
yeah,
Oh,
people
okay.
go way past that
Yeah.
all the time. People blow past rehabilitation. A lot of times they grow, they get better. So I said, I need to have a new word. So I was throwing around some ideas with some colleagues, and one of them mentioned, hey, what about meta? Well, that means surpassing, meaning going beyond. I go, that's right. And I go, how about meta habilitation? Way better way to describe what actually can and does happen, that people surpass baseline. They go down a bit. Like I said, you have to be depressed. You have to grieve. Things change. But then when you get back to baseline, you can move past that. And that is also post-traumatic growth, or MetaHab, which is actually a clinical pathway. It's a philosophy, but also it's a direct clinical pathway. It's a mechanism in order to move through. So I devised, through many interviews with people who've gone through horrific things, and I noted that there was actually stages that they went through. So I created 6 stages of MetaHab. And then I also noted what I've identified as characteristics or facilitating conditions. And so in my book and in my workbooks, I have those. And so I'll work with people and I'll say, okay, when they get to the point where they have characteristics and conditions, I want you to check off what you have. And people will say, okay, well, wait, do you want me to say what I don't have? I go, no. What am I going to do with that? I don't know what to do with that. We want to focus on what you have, what you can do, and then start moving in that direction. And that, again, puts people in the mindset of making choices, taking control. And as I said to you, neurobiology, research is way on the side of, even when people have the perception that they have some control over their situation, they do better.
Right. And you can probably fake that pretty well, or
you might have to fake it at first, but then it becomes the way you think. A lot of times we fake feeling good, but then it becomes your reality.
Right. Fake it till you make it is allowed, says Dr. Joyce. How about that? We've had that from other experts too. I love that one. Tell my kids that all the time. Yeah. Before we continue down this path, I want to know about that class. Are there differences between the male and female brain?
Well, there's a lot of research to show it goes both ways. In terms of there's no difference, and then yes, there is difference. But what the focus of my class, and what I like to tell students at the end of the day, we are way more alike than we are different, and that our differences are our strengths. So if there's a difference in it, it has more to do with the processing of information, as well as sometimes how we go through our stages. That males and females go through stages in terms of reading, math, whatever. How they move through that is a slightly different. But we all have the same brain parts. We all have them there. Some of them are a little bit different in terms of size, shape, neuronal density, but we all have them there. But we are way more alike than we are different. And we do have some differences, but that brings our strength. That causes strength.
How do some of those things play out, like in a relationship setting, or?
Probably, the garden variety things we talk about with regard to communication, especially. We do see some differences with regard to the developmental processing with girls and boys in terms of reading, speech, those types of things we see. We do talk a lot about some of the adolescent brain, what's going on with there, and maybe some shifts and differences that happen with that, and what we can do to keep our brain healthy and to have it grow and to start to move us out of our adolescent brain, should I say, into our adult brain, where we really engage that lovely frontal cortex that helps us with all our decision making and moral decisions and cognitive abilities and that. So, yeah. So we do see, some differences, but they are minimal at best. And they really have more to do, I think, with the processing, and over time, the developmental staging of that. We may not be developing and staging at the same time.
So, what are some nutritional needs of the brain,
Oh,
as you mentioned to your students?
I always say, your brain, you're studying, your brain needs to be fed, not nachos and Mountain Dew. Your
Mm,
brain. So we talk a lot about, again, you even mentioned sleep. I almost am nervous about saying this because I'm not as good at sleep as I tell people they should be
mm,
good at sleep. So when I say this, it reminds me I have to do this. But sleep is so key to brain growth and development, health and wellness. No question about it. And then also we talk about nutrition, and again, complex carbohydrates, everything, you stay away from processed foods, especially. I really stay away from that and get into, nuts, dried fruits, those type of thing. I said, if you're studying and you need to feed, you're hungry, get a handful of almonds, walnuts, dried fruit, and your brain will immediately love that resource and that help for it. Also, the other thing too is that sometimes you get to a point where your brain needs to have a little relaxation.
mm.
So instead of playing a video game, go out of doors, go for a walk, go for a run, go lift some weights, go do something like that. Your brain will love that. And it'll be better and more on point when you go back to studying again. So we talk a lot about that type of brain health and wellness.
So, if you've been working with the kids for a while, I
Mhm.
imagine you've seen some changes thanks to the culture and the advancement of technology and the mobile device. And I'm wondering if
Mhm.
you have any commentary on that, of how things might be different and the challenges of today. To me, having lived half my life or whatever without
Mhm.
any mobile device or internet, the contrast is really disturbing. And
Yeah.
there's so many things that are great, and I'm an enthusiastic consumer
No.
of Google Maps that'll get me there every time
Right.
instead of having to pull over and unfold a piece of paper. But it is kind of troubling to see how pervasive the stimulation is, and
Yes.
the nonstop opportunity to be entertained, losing out on some of those precious things like daydreaming or simple
Oh.
downtime.
And can I just tell you, when people are daydreaming, their brain is doing a lot of work. There's a lot of
Aha.
work being done with that. So if you see sometimes kids staring out the window, do not stop that a lot. That helps a lot, as does free play. People don't realize what free play does to the brain growth and development is so important. But as you're talking about the devices, one of the things that I have insinuated in my class is we have no technology. Like I will
Mm.
use some PowerPoint and that type of thing, but students are not allowed to use their phone, an iPad. And at first they kind of like, well, that's how I take my notes. And I said, you know what's really cool that your brain loves and loves and loves is a piece of paper and a pen and scribbling down some notes. Then you can take those notes and transcribe them onto your computer so you can learn twice.
Now
But
you could take
I
a picture of them. I found out.
yeah, yeah.
Those apps, like, they take a picture of your notes and put it into text.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Well, but I'm very big on not allowing students to have that type of technology in the class, that we do a lot more of interaction. And I tell them we actually I've incorporated into my neuro class the whole notion of screen time. And we'll talk about if there gender differences in screen time, for example, or just what is screen time? What is it? Recreational screen time. What is appropriate for recreational screen time in terms of different age groups and what they can do? And it's really surprising to them. And I don't know how much it actually may change their behavior, but it definitely builds an awareness around how you are using these devices in a way that you control them, and are
Mm.
they controlling you. And so, yeah, we talk about, we do bring up that a lot because to me, the brain, I mean, I'm athletic. So obviously I love my heart, my lungs, my musculoskeletal system, all that. But having gone through the event that I went through, where I had that sudden death and then the extended CPR, and all that, and having lost some brain activity, I am so recognized how precious our brains are. They're how we drive them. Our brains are the only organ that can actually think about itself. And so we look at it and can contemplate how to make our brains bigger, better, and stronger. And that is so key just to whether you're an athlete, whether you're a parent, teaching, whatever, brain health and wellness is key to all those functions to function well.
Listeners, viewers, I think we better go back to 1990 now. If you read the description of the book on the Amazon page or whatever, you present this event in your life as a huge turning point. So take us back there and tell us what happened.
Well, at that point in time, my husband and I had 3 children. And at that point, our youngest son wasn't quite 2 and our daughters were 7 and 8. And they were on a swim team in Sacramento. And there was a championship swim meet. Few years before that, had gotten into, I'd gained quite a bit of weight after my first 2 pregnancies. In order to lose that, I cleaned up my diet and I started walking and then running and then started running marathons and loved that. And then I got into doing triathlons. So I was a very active mother of 3. At this championship swim meet, I have zero memory of any of this. My event happened on a Sunday. I don't really remember the weekend at all, and I don't remember for about a month afterwards. But what I was told is they had a break in the swim meet for the kids, and they had an adult relay, a fun adult relay. Well, I'm uber competitive, so nothing's fun for me. It's all competitive. So I grabbed my husband and I grabbed a couple of friends of mine who were there, and I said, come on, let's go swim this, and we're going to win this, and I'm going to swim the last lap, because I've been doing a lot of training for some triathlons I was doing, and I said, I'm the fastest, so I'm going to swim the last lap. So I swam the last lap of the relay race, finished at the end of the pool that was 13 feet deep, and just proceeded to sink to the bottom. And the timer, said to my husband, is your wife okay? She's on the bottom. He goes, she just goes down and she kind of jumps up and gets to the top. Your wife's not surfacing. So my husband dove to the bottom of the pool, got me to the side. Luckily, because there were a lot of children there were a lot of parents there. And some of those parents were a couple of an ER doc, a cardiac nurse specialist, a pulmonologist. So they were kind of knew what they were doing when they gave me CPR. So I received 22 minutes of CPR at poolside. They were able to land a helicopter close. It was at Jesuit High School in Sacramento. They landed a helicopter in the football field at Jesuit. They took me to University of California, Davis, the med center. My heart stopped again in the helicopter. They got it going. And that's when I ended up in ICU on a respirator. But actually came through that. I got off the respirator. I don't remember any of this pretty quickly. And then I was transferred to another hospital. But that is when my life changed, like, dramatically.
Well, wait a sec. 22 minutes is not a typical duration. They're trying to get you back. It usually happens in seconds, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what was going on during that 22 minutes?
Well, they were just, trying to
your heart
get
wasn't starting.
It wasn't starting.
Yeah.
I wasn't breathing on my own. And I actually said, because when I was a nurse, before I became a nurse practitioner, I was an ICU nurse, and I was an ICU nurse in medical intensive care. And we used to answer every code in the hospital and do, CPR and do that. And I know how long that all is. And I remember saying to one of the doctors afterwards, wait a second, over 20 minutes, did you think of stopping? And he goes, no, your husband's there, your kids are. No, we weren't going to stop the code. We got it till we got you breathing and your heart going and then transferred you. But obviously, you can well imagine that took its toll on me neurologically, for sure. And so when I was able to, what I remember is one of the doctors came into my room. I'll never forget this. By the time I kind of had a recollection of what was going on, I remember sitting up in my bed.
Just a month later?
Yeah, this is a couple weeks later, at least 2 or 3 weeks later. And the doctor came in and I said, well, what happened? And, he told me, and I was like, no, because I don't remember that
Listen,
happened or
I'm
whatever.
an ER nurse. Don't BS me here. Tell me what happened.
And he said, yeah, you died and you resuscitated. And so then I said to him, I said something to him about, well, when will I be able to run again? And he said, oh, you'll never run again. And I absolutely lost it. I just fell apart. And my husband is saying, why do you care about running again? You're alive, you're alive. But I know that sounds crazy to a lot of people, but that's a joy in your life. That was my socialization. That was my identity, and all of a sudden, boom, it is gone. And then also, I didn't recognize my husband right away. I didn't recognize my children. I mean, I was just really messed up. And to get all this at once was just overwhelming to me. And I remember seeing that doctor like the next day in the hallway at the hospital. And I said to him, you don't know who you're talking to. I've been through a lot of bad things in my life and I'm going to get through this, and you watch, and I'm going to run again, and I'm going to do this again, and I'm going to, and, instead of telling me what I can't do, your job is to ask me what I want to do, or tell me what I can do, to ask me what I want to do and to get me there. That's your job. And so I turned around, go back to my room, and I couldn't find my room. And he said, look she's yelling at me and she doesn't even know where her room is. But it was, again, I was just so defiant. I was so, and that actually, the real feelings behind that was unbelievable fear that I was never going to get back, and just being angry. Those are some of the real emotions that you go through, and it comes out as, being obstinate or whatever, but it really is fear that the life I knew changed completely. And I didn't realize it then, but I was going to have to organize and think about what was my life going to be like after this.
Mm-hmm.
And all the things that were very important to me, my family, like I told you, I didn't recognize them at first. My athletic activity, gone. My brain, which I loved, gone. Simple things I couldn't remember. I couldn't organize my thinking. I was a mess. And so, kind of crawling back from that over time provided me what I have come to see has been my purpose in life. And that is to recognize that these things are bad. This is tough stuff going through, but there is a way out and a way up. And we need to process that with patients in a productive mannerism and productive mechanism that shows them a way that there is hope, they have control, they can make choice, and their life more than likely is not going to look like the same that did before. It can be better.
Wow. So I'm still stuck on the 22 minutes at poolside. and you clearly suffered neurological damage if you don't recognize your husband and children.
Yes.
So I guess 2 questions. One is, if it took that long, how the heck did you come back? If you're dead that long, I assume that the odds or the stats of doing CPR for 22 minutes doesn't come through successfully very often. Maybe someone would have quit at 21 minutes. and that would have been it. So how did that happen for you? And then detail what was going on to cause you to lose all those faculties, not recognize people, not know where your room was, but then slowly crawl your way back.
Well, that's a loaded question. I'm going to unpack it a little bit here. So I think the extended CPR, again, had to do with the fact that I was a young woman. I was in good health, and my family was there, and they were not going to let this go. They were going to keep it going. One of the physicians, Bruce Gordon, who's an ER doc, I asked him afterwards, people, I don't want to say made fun of me, but they would say, oh, she's this big athlete and look what happened to her. And Bruce said, there's no way you could have ever survived what you survived had you not been in the shape you were in. That took you through. So that was very fundamental for me, again, to hear. And in terms of getting back my brain, I'm going to go back to Bruce. I saw him probably a couple months or so after I got out of the hospital. And so, he said, hey, how you doing? And I said, Bruce, physically, I'm doing okay. I'm physically, I was, up and walking. I actually started jogging a little bit and doing some crazy, whatever.
This is 2 months out.
Yeah. But 2 or 3 months out. But I said, Bruce, I think I have brain damage. And this was like in 1990, and nobody ever said anything to me about TBI, traumatic, but I never heard that term. And I said to Bruce, I think I have brain damage. And he kind of chuckled and he said, look you're an athlete. And when you have an athletic injury, you have to rehab that injury. Your brain has been injured because of the extended CPR. You have to rehab your brain. And as soon as he said that, I went, oh, okay. All right. That's what I'm going to do. And when I was in the hospital, they had a speech therapist helping me. And I was very frustrated and didn't want to work with her because I could speak, but I had tremendous aphasia. So, for example, I would want to say, one time my husband said, can I get you something? And I wanted an orange. And I could not say the word orange. I could say, I want one of those things that you peel and it's juicy and it has vitamins. You could talk all around it. So I had this aphasia and I had obviously forgetfulness. I couldn't connect. And so when he said that, I go, I'm going to go back to a speech therapist because my articulation was okay. But the part of my temporal lobe, part of the brain that had to do with that had been injured. So I needed to work with that. Also, I started thinking about, I got my degree as a nurse practitioner from UC Davis. And I was at UC Davis Med Center. So some of my former faculty had come to see me. Well, I reached out to them and I said, can I sit in class again? Can I just sit in class and listen again? So they allowed me to do that. And then another thing that I did to help get me going is I found a doctor, a cardiologist who was a runner. And he's a big time runner. And he said, we don't know exactly how far this is going to go, but let's get you going. And he put me in cardiac rehab. Well, I'm 35 years old in cardiac rehab, obviously the youngest person there, but it got me to start exercising in a controlled atmosphere so I could look at my abilities. And man, then I just started getting traction. Then I started seeing things, what I could do, and I started things moving on. Well, I didn't know it then, but teaching this course in neuroscience also taught me about plasticity, that the brain can be healed. It's just like collateral circulation in your heart. You can do collateral neural pathways. So if there are damaged areas in your brain, but again, it doesn't happen unless you engage with the process. So if you want to get bigger biceps, you can't sit around hoping you get bigger biceps. You need to do what you need to do that. So lifting and doing all that. Well, the same thing with my brain. I couldn't sit around hoping my brain to get better. I had to engage meaningfully with it. And so reading, going back to class, going to speech therapy and doing the work that they had me do, all this kind of stuff. So new brain cells developed, new pathways occurred, and over time, I got it back. And so when and then I also thought, 2 years after my accident, if I really want to get my brain back, I got to go back to school. So I decided to go back to get my master's degree. So I live close to Sac State, and Sac State has a nursing school, Sac State where I teach now, but has nursing school, and they had a master's. So I went to the nursing, office, and I was talking to a woman at the office, and I said, I'd like to apply to the master's program here. Not sure how well I'll do because I had this event. So just as I was saying that, the chair of the division of nursing walked by. Her name is Dr. Robin Nelson. And she stopped and she looked at me and she said, "What's your name?" And I told her Joyce Mikal-Flynn, and she said, "I was there that day." She had a daughter on a swim team, another swim team. So she saw it. She goes, "Come in my office." So Robin really mentored and helped me through. And I got my master's looking at people who had survived death events. Well, then
that was your focus of your master's?
Of my master's thesis.
Wow.
And so I looked at, had they gone through being depressed? Had they gone through these different things? And so again, patterns and patterns. So then I got back into it, and I had children to raise. And so I went back, I started seeing patients. Luckily, Dr. Dan Fields, my friend and mentor, got me back into seeing patients clinically and helped me that. So I started seeing patients a couple of days a week. And I just started noticing patients that I'd see, or a book I'd read, or a movie I'd see of people going through horrific things. And again, not overnight, but over time, not only survived, but thrived. And not in spite of what happened, but as a direct result. And I was fascinated by that. So after the kids got older and I went back to get my doctorate. And so I studied, that's what I studied in my doctoral work. And that's how meta-hab or meta-habilitation came up, and the system and all that. So, yeah. And it was really cute. When I finished my doctorate, my husband and my kids had a nice party for me. And of course, they invited the docs who resuscitated me. And so Bruce Gordon was there, was one of the docs who was there. But after somebody said, I was giving a little talk about thank you for all people who had brought me back. And I mentioned obviously the doctors. And so after I gave, and somebody said, "Well, tell us what you did your dissertation on." And I said, I gave them the whole thing. This is a study that I did. And this is what the methodology I used. And I went through all this, and this was great. And so, that's great. So Bruce walked up to me afterwards and said, "That brain damage you said you had, I think you fixed it. I think you fixed it." So so that was great. And then that's what I've been doing all along since that time. So I finished my doctorate in 2005. I've been teaching at Sacramento State University in the Division of Nursing since then, and have dedicated my, again, really personal, because I take this personally, as well as my professional and research life into this endeavor.
You said that the brain's the only organ that can reflect upon its own function. Our kidneys aren't thinking about our kidneys. Now, when you were going through this meta-habilitation journey, I almost said rehabilitation of your brain, but your meta-habilitation of your brain, were you able to reflect and notice, oh, gee, before I couldn't say orange, I could describe it as the thing that you peel that's juicy. So were you able to kind of monitor your progress from a distance, knowing, hey, Joyce is doing better today, or something to that effect while your brain was healing?
I could definitely, I wouldn't see it on a day-to-day thing, but then something would happen where I would read things and I would recall it again. Things recall was better, and I'd feel that, and I just feel how that, okay, I'm feeling more. I think I was out for a run one time, and it was not quite 2 years after my event, but it was close to that. I remember being out on this run and running again, like it's just such a reflective, prayerful time for me too, that, you really can get into yourself and think it's beautiful. But I was reflecting about things and I thought, yeah, I think I'm feeling like I was before. I'm feeling more and more like pretty much like I was. I feel like I kind of came back from that.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so I definitely remember having a conscious thought like I'm feeling more comfortable about things. So, yeah.
Wow, that's really hard for almost everyone to relate to. I guess if you missed a night of sleep or you're jet lagged and you're slowly coming back to life and you can feel your brain coming back online, it would be a minor example of the same thing where you just notice and another day comes and progress continues. I suppose same with building the bicep muscles.
Mm-hmm.
You don't wake up Tuesday from your Monday workout and say, wow, I'm getting the guns back. It just kind of happens 6 months later. You look at an image or whatever it is.
Right.
But that journey is pretty precious and valuable experience. You've turned it into something awesome. But I think you also mentioned some struggles that ensued in your personal life after the incident.
Oh yeah. No, there, you really, and that's the thing that I have had to also incorporate and make sure I reflect on again. I never say to people when they're just going through something, well, this is a real growth experience for you. Like in my head, I know that,
You
but
smile,
yeah.
you're thinking
I will
it.
never say that. I will say, here's the hardcore truth. You've been through some stuff. And part of the process is going through being unbelievably bummed out and depressed and sad and scared. And when I hear that, it doesn't frighten me. It lets me know you are engaging with the process. And so this is not a psychiatric disorder. This is sorry, should I turn that off?
Oh.
Sorry, my phone.
It's not a psychiatric disorder.
Yeah, I tell people it's not it's a life situation. It's a living situation. And we need to engage it in that manner. You're not a crazy person. You've been through something and you need to sometimes crawl your way out of that. And it's tough. But the focus over time has continually to be on making a choice, making probably multiple choices on moving forward, and recognizing that, again, these are parts of the process. I'll tell you, when I went back to see patients, and this was several months after my accident, but again, I mentioned, Dan Fields, who was a physician that I was in co-practice with, and he really helped me. We started seeing easy stuff, and he would see every patient with me, and we'd go over that, and he really worked me through that process. But I remember driving home one night, and I just had I was just thinking about it as I was driving home and thinking, gosh, everything that used to come so easy to me, so difficult. I just have to work so hard. This is so hard coming back. I don't know if I can do this. And then I thought if I just drove my car into that embankment, it would be over. Because this is so hard. I don't think I can do this. And then just all of a sudden, this little voice in my head said, there's a ton of people who brought you back. There's a lot of people who spent time and energy on bringing you back, and you have family and everything. And at that moment, and again, like I get emotional because I just remember being taken back to that moment. But I hear this in other people's stories. There's this moment in time where you go, I have no idea how I'm going to pull this off, but I am going to move forward. I am making the choice to move forward. And so again, once you make that critical choice, And isn't that the bad stuff goes away or was never there? But you tend to, again, start to look at how can I use that? How can I use that bad stuff to motivate me to move forward? How can I engage people, friends and family or whatever, to help me move in a productive, purposeful manner? And that's the thing I think sometimes we miss. But if you talk to people who have been through that, I'm telling you, you will hear that in their stories over and over again. Athletes who didn't get their time, didn't get their place or whatever. Yes, it hurts. They're bummed. They can be bummed for a while. They can be really depressed for a while. But then they start to say, okay, that was then. What am I what lessons am I taking forward? And to me, that is critical. So when you're going through this and you're going through tough times, it is so important to make sure you attend to those aspects too. So get a good therapist, but get a therapist who recognizes you want to move forward. Get a good counselor, get a good coach, get somebody that's going to help you. Because here's the other thing that is so fundamentally clear to me. I'm a pretty tough person. I did a lot of stuff I can get through this. I can get through this. This was way bigger than anything I'd ever gone through before. And I slowly but surely came to realize this is bigger than me. And if I'm going to get through this, I am going to have to ask for and accept help.
That's an interesting transition from being the baddest mofo on the planet to this is bigger than me.
Mm-hmm. And once you get yourself right and recognize if I'm going to move forward, but you listen. I tell my students this too, listen to the right people, pick good people, listen, take that advice and get that support. You're not going to get through this alone. And I don't care if it's a cancer diagnosis and treatment, domestic violence, spinal cord injuries, all the veterans, all these people I've really worked with and dealt with in terms of using MetaHab in programming. It's over and over. You hear it over and over again. Addiction and dependency, all those things people go through. Athletes who have retired. Athletes, I did a big study here. Not a huge study, but I did a nice study here at Sac State. I got a grant from the NCAA to look at athletes and resilience. And we did a podcast called Athletes Interrupted and talked about athletes who have had everything from coaching changes to injuries to changing colleges to, having had to retire, once they stopped their collegiate athletics, they were done. And that transition and identity crisis. I mean, all those kinds of things. You're not getting through this stuff alone. You need to, learn from people who have gone through that and get that support. It was so fascinating to me to look at that. Real quick, the other thing that was fascinating to me is I did the series of podcasts, but I also did some study on resilience for athletes. And one of the things that came out of that was a finding that we saw was athletes did not identify themselves as being particularly resilient. And I thought that was fascinating. Like, wait a second, when you've reached collegiate athletics at a D1 college, you've been through lots of losses, successes for sure, but losses and this
Funnels
and everything, all this kind of
team.
And you don't see yourself, you don't identify as being resilient.
There's only 12 people on the team, dude. You're pretty resilient because 87 tried out or whatever.
And I thought that, so that was a place for me to go too. When you're working, why are they not identifying themselves as being resilient? What is that about? So I thought that was kind of interesting outcome and talked about
What's
that.
that about?
Mhm.
What is it about?
I don't know. That's surprising to me, that to think that they don't see themselves with that characteristic. Why don't they have, why? I don't know. I guess it's just a conundrum that I get to kind of look at in the future about that. But it is interesting to me. What about, I'm doing some work, with first responders, and, I've done some work with veterans, and are are they not seeing themselves as being resilient? And, are we, when we're doing programming for them, if we get athletes coming in as freshmen or transfers or whatever, is part of their programming, do we talk about that? Do we talk about, the resiliency in them and incorporating that and seeing how they can how they're connecting those dots? Because they're not connecting the dots sometimes, because they clearly are resilient, but how they're not identifying that is crazy. So working with, first responders or veterans and cadet training and doing programming around what this is all about, so that they can start to incorporate that mindset as they go through, and you continually go through that during their time.
Yeah, I guess in many successful athletes, you want to form some protections against getting too arrogant or getting comfortable and cushy and then losing your edge. And so Tom Brady pretends that he's in summer training camp, vying for a spot with other quarterbacks and playing all kinds of sort of games. So maybe that's one thing that comes to my mind, is saying, if you ask about all these amazing attributes, I'm not going to list them 1 through 10. I'm going to say, just out there trying to battle for the next, the next competition. It could be, but especially with a young athlete, there's probably some fears and insecurities that have driven them to push themselves so hard to reach the Division I level. Maybe the hotshot who's headed to the pros is going to have a different mindset than someone who just made the cut and was lucky to get a walk-on position. They're not going to call themselves resilient, because that hunger is what got them to that point.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, no, I appreciate that perspective. Unfortunately, I wanted to do, I crunched some numbers around that. I did some quantitative research findings around that. I wanted to do some, group surveying kind of thing. And because of COVID, we weren't allowed to do that. But that is something that I would like to see what's behind those numbers. So you've given me some insight to that.
Tell
so
me
I appreciate
Tell
that.
me more, young athlete.
Yeah. I appreciate that. No, that's really good insight.
I'm thinking back to this swim meet and your immersive role as a parent, watching your kids swim, and maybe the parents are holding stopwatches and writing in the pad and swarming over this. I called it the helicopter parenting era. You corrected me and said, no, it's the lawnmower parent era, where we're mowing, we're paving the way so everything's smooth and easy for our kids. And then you're at the bottom of the pool rather than the stands. And I'm wondering about that shift in perspective, where it's like all these things that seem so important and all the drama of daily life and the worries that we have about our car registration, or whether our kid's going to be in the A heat or the B heat. When that stuff's blown up, I know that there's an adjustment factor, and I'm wondering, you had to fight and regain and get out of the hospital bed and take all those steps. But then one day you're sitting on the couch, you got your life back. It looks like you're going to be okay. But how do you recalibrate now? And what you said you struggled in assorted ways, and whatever you're going to talk about there, that seems to be another layer of challenge that's right there, in importance or difficulty of actually getting the neurons firing again.
Yeah, that is such a great question. It was funny. I remember a friend said to me, after your whole event, act, whatever, I noticed that you just seemed calmer. You were calmer and you were more, open or whatever. And so I definitely understand. I've always been an optimistic person. I have. But I even became more, because I've seen what people have gone through and go, wow, look at what they've gone through and come out of this. And so I know I have such a belief in the capacity of the human spirit, the human mind, the human being itself. So I look at that and I recognize and I believe in that. So it kind of calms me down from getting nervous about other things, because I go, one of my favorite things is when I talk to students and I say, tell me your story. And they tell me these stories that are just, and I will look at them. I say, look at me. You got this. Do you not understand? You got this. Do you not see this in yourself? Do you not see that strength and ability? And I think that's a lot of what came out of this for me, and recognizing that there are things, there are going to be some wins, there's going to be some disappointments. And I need to recognize how to be a decent, productive human being in both those cases. You got to know how to work with both of those and to be present. I don't get myself wrapped up in stuff that I just think is like, oh, you got to, meet this person or this important, but I don't see that. People to me are important and exciting because of what they do, what they've given back, their presence in their people's lives around them. I get very interested and excited about that, but I'm not celebrity stuff. I'm not that impressed with at all. In terms of getting myself worked up about problems, I will take some deep breaths. I do get upset about certain things, but then I say, okay, put this in perspective. So I'm older than this now, but when I was 50 years old, I was out for a run. And again, I can, that's such a good time for me to think through things. And I was out and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm 50 years old. I am 50 years old. Then all of a sudden I had this like shift in thought and said, no, you got to be 50, because when you were 35, you were dead. And you're going to get to be 51, and you're going to get to be 52. And now I got to be 67. And I have, seen all three of my children play D1 sports in college. 2 played soccer, 1 played water polo. They are, all 3 of them, our son just got married a month ago. So all 3 of them are married, lovely, wonderful spouses. My husband and I now have 6 grandchildren. I go, I get to be doing this. I tell my students the other day, I go, I want you to, I have them try and achieve that mindset. And I said, but think about it this way. Instead of saying, I have to take this test, I get to take this test. I have to go to school. I get to go to school. Because do you know how many people would love to be sitting exactly where you're sitting right now? And you get to do that. So I think that shifted for me tremendously. Well, not tremendously, but my event gave such meaning and structure to my thoughts about life and how to be in the world afterwards.
Whew. If you're not an optimist before listening to that last passage, I think it's time to shift, especially with aging is one of the biggest complaints or the biggest ways that we lament throughout life. I think it's a common theme. And boy, I feel the same way. It's such a privilege to have reached this age, and to think in any form of negativity about it. You don't even have to have had your heart stopped at a certain previous age. You're just, anything can happen anytime.
Right.
And so what a gift it is for, what am I, 56? Hey, it's a great year, know? Yeah.
Exactly
incredible.
Right.
Wow. But even 10 times more profoundly for you, because you can always put your finger on that age 35 and think that would have been it.
One of my colleagues said this to me the other day. I love it. She's semi-retired, and and she said, I'm living in the carpe diem part of my life. Seize the day. I show up for everything. And I love that. And I show up to run, and I show up for family events, and I show up for my students, and I show up for this podcast. Like, I show up for stuff because I'm here and I
Might as
get
well.
to do that.
Right.
So it's like a lovely thing to be able to participate in life. And the other thing too is you do, I'm not running a marathon as fast as I used to. In fact, I haven't run a marathon in a while. I've run some halves, and I do running every day. I'm not running as fast, but I also love the whole notion of adaptation and acceptance. Just because you can't do it that fast doesn't mean you can't do it. You just adapt and accept to what you can do and enjoy the process and keep pushing yourself and going, how can I make things better? That's always what I want to do. How can I be a better 67-year-old person? Keep moving, Listen, I love you listening to you and these lovely books that, seeing the lovely books you've written and everything really reminds me, I got to clean up some of the way I'm eating and stuff. So I'm so happy to be talking to you because, again, it's such a great reminder to me. There are some things that you are doing that are less than productive. And just talking to you today, I need to clean that up a bit.
And you're smiling while you say it, which is a huge difference from beating yourself up, saying I'm falling short here, I'm falling short there, and that's something that it's increasing interest to me as I get older and hopefully more wiser and more mature, seeing that that drive and that competitive intensity that endurance athletes are familiar with, and it can make you get to the finish line, but it could also be something that can leak in an inappropriate manner. Your friend calls you more calm. I believe that would be a compliment and probably an attribute. Whereas if, some of that edge that you have to achieve high goals in academia and put finish awards up on your wall here, some of that can get misappropriated at times.
Yeah.
And she's smiling while she's cleaning up her diet. People were going to check in 60 days and see how that goes. But that I feel like is the best place to start something like a personal transformation. Is you're looking so forward to choosing better foods and ditching the bad stuff. It's going to be amazing.
Well, and I like it too when I talk about that. I always say to people, it never works to change everything. Pick one thing. Pick one thing for the next week. I'm going to stop eating goldfish, or something.
There you go.
Like just
refined industrial seed oils in there. One of the worst things you can put in your mouth and your kids.
Thank you. And so I go, okay, I use that as a little snack. I'm going to stop that. I can do that one thing. And I'll just keep doing it for the week. I do everything else, but just do that one thing for the week or whatever. And that's when I talk to people about really in the aftermath of challenges and things. I go, you know what? Don't worry about 5 years down the road. Don't worry about even next year. Let's look at today and pick one thing this week or this month that you're going to say, I've done that. I'm going to get back into doing that. Because people really we didn't get this far without having some good habits. So pick a habit that you did before and do it. One of the things I do, a women's wellness day, I live part of the time in Sonoma, and the running trails there are like nirvana, is heaven. So I bring groups of women to Sonoma, and we do a women's wellness day. And part of it is there's no PowerPoint. There's nothing like that. We interact with each other. And part of the day is we take a hike. We do it out of door, and we take a hike on the trails. And so when we come back, we do some debrief and whatever. And I go, think about something. Is there something you did before that you stopped doing, but you really gave you pleasure? Really calmed you down? And women will talk from everything from, again, physical activity, crocheting, painting, journaling. I go, what's stopping you? If you already have identified that as an activity, I'm not going to say, why don't you start journaling? No, I want to know, what have you done before that gave you that gratitude, that calmness or whatever? can you think about maybe doing it again? So I don't like to give people new stuff to do. I like them to go back in their toolbox,
Mm-hmm.
pick out something they did before, and start doing it
Easier,
again.
less intimidating.
Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah, it's great.
If we can get some quick takeaway tips in some areas, and one of them I'm thinking of is you mentioned that it's okay, or you actually said you need to fall into despair and depression as you're processing trauma. And then there's probably a ticking clock somewhere. You mentioned how the endurance legend, entrepreneur legend Sally Edwards came over to your house a year after your accident and said, "Here's some goggles. We're going to go start swimming. We're going to do a triathlon." So she had impeccable timing.
Yes.
You reference it as a great turning point in your life.
Yes.
Because she said, "Yeah, 1 year's time to whatever, quit feeling sorry for yourself and get your goggles back on." And I know that support crew and people that are trying to do their best for someone who's struggling are constantly balancing tact with the ticking clock and wondering when is that time for the intervention or the kick in the butt to get off the couch and so forth.
Well, one of the things I do want to bring up too, and you mentioned with Sally, love Sally, I've known her for a while. She's been integral part. It's awesome. But the key thing you just said is she came to my house with my goggles and said, "Let's go swimming." She didn't tell me go swim. She did it with me.
Oh, wow.
And that's
she
a key.
really did care.
She did. She said, "I'll go. We're going swimming." And she went with me.
Big difference.
Totally big difference.
That's what you see in the movie scenes too, Dr. Joyce.
Yeah.
It's always someone coming and dragging them out, and then they go have a good time.
Then they go, yeah, that's right. And it is a good time when somebody's there and you're comfortable and all that. So I think in terms of the timing, that's such a great question. And it's kind of open to interpretation with different aspects. But I would say when people are going through things, that especially in the first stage of Metahab is the acute phase. And that is the part where you really do have to spend 3, 6, whatever, how many months, about 6, really working through the whether you're in an ICU or coming out of depression, whatever, working through this tough, really emotional, intellectual, and even physical stuff. There's just a lot of energy spent on doing that. Starting to see making choices, again, making the choice to move forward, taking control, and starting to move forward. And so as we work with people, we're not doing this to you, we're doing this with you as we're working this through and making suggestions. What do you want to do next? How are you going to move forward? What are you going to do? So I would say, in general, within the first year, that's a really intense, big, tough year that, again, I don't ever have people we're not looking at the finish line now. We're looking at getting to mile 1, then mile 2.
Don't be talking about no finish line with me right now.
Yeah. And so you go through that, and then you start to point out traction that they've made. So the first 3 to 6 months, key on really focusing. And then again, starting to have them take control and turning their lives over back and how they're moving forward. And it's sort of like with children. I would just watch our grandchildren this weekend. And one of the things that is so key to me when I'm for our children, catching them doing something good, catching them doing something. Hey, I just saw you helped your sister up. Well done. Good job. That's it. You don't need to go crazy. Just well done. Good job. So as you're working with people and you're seeing, you go, hey, you might not have noticed this because you're living in your own body, but I saw you a week ago, and today I noticed you're smiling more, or I noticed you walked another half mile, or I noticed that. Catching people doing it so they again become aware of their progress, start moving forward. It's going to be the intense time and everything. It's a year plus for sure. You really do. Again, depending upon what it is you're going through makes a difference. I'll tell you one of the key things that's a red flag and must be monitored for and this is key, isolation.
Mm-hmm.
So I tell people there are times when you need to be by yourself and chill and think about this. But if I'm working with vets, first responders, people going through different things, if you are noticing that they are spending a month or two or whatever, like checking out, they're not going to class, they're not going to church, they're not going to their workouts, they're not, going to family functions, they're not doing stuff, get on that.
Mm.
Isolation is a problem. Not everybody who isolates is going to self-harm or get into trouble. But when I look at people who have self-harmed or gotten into trouble, isolation seems to be a part of that.
Mm-hmm. And don't just call them or text them. Go over to their house, ring the doorbell with some figurative goggles in hand, and get them out.
Yeah,
love that.
That is a perfect thing. Let's go. Hey, I'm going to the movies. Let me treat you. I'm going to this. Let me do. That's a perfect thing. But that to me, I have when I was working with vets, I had a very special vet who I had worked with, and I really loved the guy. He was so positive and productive. We started doing some, thinking about doing stuff at Sac State. He was just an amazing guy. And I think it's now 2 years ago, one of the head vets who worked in that organization called me and told me I had taken his life. And I was absolutely devastated. I was devastated. And I look at that, and again, they identified he had been checking out. And you just can't do this. This is this beautiful, lovely person. And it makes me sad. So I like to bring that forward. When you talk about doing things together, when I would do I was doing some overnight stuff. I did an overnight thing with vets, and we'd go hiking and camp and all that's really cool. Out of door activities, key. Out of door activities, the best in terms of healing. But when we got there, they said, okay, we're going to assign you a battle buddy. And I love that. I go, well, what's a battle buddy? So a battle buddy is like, you check in with Joyce. Have you eaten? I go, have you eaten yet? Where are you? You're not looking after yourself. You're looking after your buddy and making sure they're okay. So that was Sally was my battle buddy in a lot of times, and so also when you have that, you stop thinking less about yourself, obviously, and you focus on the health and well-being of somebody else. It's a beautiful thing. And that gets you going too, because again, you realize you have something to offer. There's purpose in your life. So find a battle buddy. That's another key thing.
Find a battle buddy. This will be covered in detail in your book, but maybe we could close with a quick hit of the 6 steps. We got to number 1, the acute phase of metahabilitation.
Yeah.
And then I'd love to tease with the rest.
So there are 6 stages. And the first stage is the acute phase. Stage 2 is what I call turning point. And that is key, where they may not identify it, but you can hear it in their story, where they, again, said, I have no idea how I'm going to pull this off, but I'm going to go forward. And there may be multiple turning points in what they do. Once they make the decision to move forward, that's when especially a lot of support has to come around them, because that's when you get into treatments, both complementary and traditional forms of treatments. People are looking stuff up for you. People are getting you to be different places you need to go. You do that. Spend a lot of time on getting back. Then you're like, whew, stage 4, adaptation. And
stage 3.
Stage 3.
Stage 2 is a turning point.
So stage 1 is acute phase. Stage 2 is turning point. Stage 3 is treatments, traditional complementary. Okay. Stage 4 is acceptance and adaptation. Now, that doesn't mean you do that for a lifetime, but you've been through a lot and you've done a lot to help yourself. This is a time and people have identified times where they just said, I just needed to set myself down for a while and think, what did this all mean? Where am I at? Where do I want to go? A very big thinking time. You accept things and you have made adaptations for right now, and you just need to have some chill time. Then stage 5 is returning to life. In some way, you're getting back.
You went to nursing. You went to grad school.
Yeah, something you do. You go back to school, you go back to work, you go back to stuff, you go back, you get back in, you get moving in, and it may not be the same. And here's the other thing people need to realize, that I have talked to a lot of people who have gone through things and didn't go back to the profession they had been in before. And it's kind of like that door shut. But these interesting, more effective, fun doors, opened. And had that door not closed, I never would have pursued this other line of work, activity, or whatever. So you get back into that. And then stage 6 is taking on the future. That's meta-hab. That's a never-ending phase. Because once you get to stage 6, you have developed a growth mindset, right? A growth mindset where every time you go through even a disappointment, you like go back to the drawing board. Okay, what stage am I in, and how am I going to move forward, and how am I going to do this? And I know I got to circle back to this stage, and then I'm going to go forward. So that's taking on the future. And that's when you look back and go, wow, this is nuts. Had I never gone through that, I don't know if I would have gone for my doctorate. I don't know if I would have I don't know what I would have done with that. So it's a never ending thing. And that's why at my age, people go, I got too much work to do. I got a lot of work to do. So I'm just coming up on another sabbatical where I'm super excited about. So I really, if, people can get to my Instagram, dr.jmf or drjmf, and my website, dr.jmf.com. I'd love if you need, I'm going to be on sabbatical, you need some, I do a lot of speaking, I do a lot of programming, I do a lot of all that. But I'm very excited too, because during my sabbatical, I'll be working on a children's book about this. I am in the process of writing a play based on this work, and then writing more about secondary and vicarious trauma survivors, especially as it relates to what we're going through now. So
go connect with her, people.
Yes.
Dr. Joyce Mikal-Flynn, thank you so much. Thanks for listening, watching, everybody. Dun, 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 dun.
Awesome.
Thank you for listening to the show. I love sharing the experience with you and greatly appreciate your support. Please email podcast@bradventures.com with feedback, suggestions, and questions for the Q&A shows. Subscribe to our email list at bradkearns.com for a weekly blast about the published episodes and a wonderful bi-monthly newsletter edition with informative articles and practical tips for all aspects of healthy living. You can also download several awesome free ebooks when you subscribe to the email list. And if you could go to the trouble to leave a 5 or 5-star review with Apple Podcasts or wherever else you listen to the shows, that would be super incredibly awesome. It helps raise the profile of the B.rad podcast and attract new listeners. And did you know that you can share a show with a friend or loved one by just hitting a few buttons in your player and firing off a text message? My awesome podcast player called Overcast allows you to actually record a soundbite excerpt from the episode you're listening to and fire it off with a quick text message. Thank you so much for spreading the word. And remember, be rad.